I'm Dane Rose, and in this video I'll explore my kind of response and maneuverings around some of Lazaris's comments about the future. So let's kind of start with a recap, not always verbatim, but what I've understood Lazaris to have said on various of the tapes. So the future is speeding up. Time is speeding up. The future creates the present against the backdrop of the past. We've already decided to create the new world, to face the challenge of possible destruction, and this time to succeed. There's a new kind of human being that is emerging. The new age is coming. Now the new age is here. The gates of Sirius have opened. All the information light coming in, changing, touching everything. The American dream has failed, but not everyone in America has realized that. The American dream has failed, but not everyone has realized that. Broken confidence leads to destruction. And more people are losing confidence in the American dream. As reality becomes more complex, the adolescent fear of responsibility increases. As that fear increases, there's a tendency to want to think less, to tune out, to let other people do the thinking, or just not think. And that provides a doorway for increased negative ego. So Lazaris has said that thinking, that's kind of what we're doing here, that thinking is a critical kind of curb to the negative face of ego. We need to piece things through and think things through, but that takes more skill and more complexity to do in a more complex, faster world. And so many people are not going to step up and really think things through, which creates a doorway for negative ego, as Lazaris defines that, to take over. And so we can expect more and more negative ego. Now that's kind of, we're dealing with, bifurcating probability fields. Lazaris has also said that the future can be a nightmare, it can be a dream, it can be a mediocrity, and that collectively we've chosen the dream, but individually we can choose the nightmare and the mediocrity. As a side note, Lazaris has said, for reasons not clearly articulated, that in their view, it's better to be part of a nightmare than it is to be part of a mediocrity. So that could take some piecing apart, but that's also one of the problems with a lack of dialogue. There's so many things to tear apart, like why would you want to be in a nightmare than in a mediocrity? Mediocre just means normal, by the way. Medium, you take the two polarities, the dream, the nightmare, that's kind of on a bell curve, but it's an abstract concept, the nightmare, the dream, two poles. The medium place, the norm, is the average, in between that. So some good things and some bad things. Not all terrible, not all wonderful, some good, some bad. Why is that worse than all bad? Well, that's for Lazaris, but Lazaris has said that as a collective we have chosen the dream, but individually we can choose the nightmare or the mediocrity. And as part of that collective, one of the things that Lazaris has said is that it's going to be harder and harder for people to hang on to the nightmare as the dream unfolds. People may just fall into it without fully understanding it and just say, fine, I'll be a part of a dream. Just be sucked into the vortex and resonance of that dream. Now, how does that fit with people having more and more negative ego and creating reality out of that negative ego because of a complexity and an unwillingness to think and an unwillingness to feel? How is that dream created as the American dream falls into the broken confidence and the destruction that emerges? You see, these statements have not been integrated in any way that I've heard, because they're said at different times and there's a lack of dialogue. There's a lack of communication back and forth between, there's no framework. Could I raise a hand and discuss these things? So as reality speeds up, we can destroy our lives faster. That's another thing Lazaris has said, right? As time speeds up, he said that, you could play around in self-pity or do this in the past and then have, maybe a few years to get out of self-pity. But as the future speeds up, you do this little thing and then your whole life blows up in an instant, right? So these are some of the things Lazaris has said about the future. Another thing Lazaris has said about the future is that they are the highest resonance that will ever make contact with the planet. Now, Lazaris has also said that the future is flexible. And Lazaris has also said that we create our reality, including choosing the futures. So you create it, the future is flexible, but this will happen, right? So there you have some tension in that. Now, I think one of the important things to look at this point is the fact that Lazaris is frequently wrong. Now, how frequently we don't know, because we don't have statistics, right? I don't know how many predictions Lazaris has made in the course of 40 years, and I don't know how many of them are correct and how many of them are incorrect. But we can look at some various obvious incorrect predictions to ascertain that Lazaris is wrong about the future some percentage of the time. And I don't think Lazaris is going out of their way to hide this. I haven't heard that they admitted, right, when they said that they thought that the Gulf War wouldn't happen, that it looked as if there would be, that the Iraq War, et cetera, that there would be come up to the brink, and then there would be diplomacy and a new map of conflict resolution would take place. Lazaris predicted that, they thought that, all the momentum was going there, but then the Gulf War happened. Lazaris said right at the last minute, the players involved said, let's just do it the old way. So Lazaris was wrong about the Gulf War. Lazaris has also been wrong about multiple medical diagnoses. So it is, legally questionable in the US to give medical advice without a license. But Lazaris has on several occasions said, you do not have cancer, we don't see this, we don't have this, or that looks like this is going to clear up. And then the person goes, gets a biopsy or whatever, and they're riddled with cancer, and it doesn't clear up. Lazaris in one of the tapes talks about, how you use your metaphysics for this, and then he says, and then you get sick and you call a doctor, a real person. You don't carry on your metaphysics. Well, in the narrative with Penny, as I understand it, she refused to call a doctor and relied on the metaphysics until she died of complications of painkillers and vodka, etc., of chronic things that didn't clear up. So what's going on there? So I think it's important to understand that there is a frequency of incorrect predictions. So which area on all these future statements is Lazaris wrong about? Now, the world is big enough that there can be both and. Many people can go deeper and deeper into negative ego, and some people can still have a dream, and even a majority of people. But Lazaris talked in broad sweeping terms about increased negativity, increased negative ego from a broad unwillingness to think. Not just pockets here and there, but that's a general trend. So how does that lead to the dream? Right? And if it can't lead to the dream for many concept synergy employees who have been in proximity for Lazaris for decades, or for Penny or Michael, and remains to be seen, for Jach, if the people in the closest proximity are not creating the dream, if a majority of them are not, because even if Jach was the odd one out, Penny died of medical complications and Michael of suicide, and multiple concept synergy former employees are left in confusion, trauma, shame, bitterness, rage, envy, jealousy, produced in the incompetence of the relationship with Lazaris, Jach, that power structure. Well, that's the majority of the people closest to Lazaris creating a nightmare. Now, Lazaris could say that that's great. You weren't mediocre. You experienced spiritual betrayal and greed and incompetence and silence and secrecy and control and domination, and had to pretend it was all spiritual. It was absolutely horrible. So good for you. You didn't have a mediocre life. But it's not a dream. So what to make of that, right? And these are the types of things that, as Lazaris accurately points out, many people do not want to think about. It's complex. What do you make of it? How do we look at these two things? More negative ego, a dream that gets bigger and bigger until people just start falling into it. You've already decided as a group that you're going to succeed this time around and not destroy yourselves like you did in Atlantis. But we can't even predict the Gulf War with 3 days in advance, right? And we can't predict a medical diagnosis with 1 day in advance. And so we're predicting this with decades in advance, and you create your reality. So there's lots to think about. Now, one of the things that I'm most curious about in this time is Lazaris's comment about the new kind of human being. Now, back in the 80s, the 70s, whatever, the new kind of human being, this, first of all, the new age is well underway according to Lazaris, and so this is it. Whatever this is it. This is the vortice open, the new age, the goddess coming, and all of that. So what is it? What's going on? And one of the very strong trends is artificial intelligence. So that's increasing at an exponential curve. The internet is increasing at an exponential curve, connectivity. Data flows are virtual reality. And so the fusion of information technology around the world, and as we send out telescopes and become more multiplanetary, a la Elon Musk, that's happening and will continue, meaning genetics, longevity type technology, new organ tissues, Neuralink, the creation of smaller and smaller devices that go into the brain and talk with other brains, etc. That's kind of moving up. The awareness of how improbable it is that we're not alone in the universe and in terms of intelligent other life and species. The more every year we see more and more planets out there that are conducive to developing some form of life. And so the probability becomes more and more irrational to believe that none of them have any life. So these are all things that are on exponential curves that could not necessarily have been easily predicted in the 70s. But here's what Lazaris means by a new kind of human being, that we basically become cyborgs. Implants for relatively telepathic communication with the internet layer and our phones. Because, this is interesting, because if that's what Lazaris means by a new kind of human being, one, with information and light, through more and more satellites and all that, well, for many of them, that's an unappealing thing, because there's a whole group of people that, don't want to be around computers. And there's studies that, the more screen time people are spending with whether social media or with that type of thing, the more depressed they are. So if you can watch social media fed directly to your brain without even having to get your phone on, the level of dopamine addiction that you're likely to be in, and if you can enter Suits and enter 3-day porn tunnels, there's already information about people abandoning their children to play addictive video games, literally starving their children to death to raise fictitious children on a farm rather than take care of their own children. And so is that a dream? Is that a nightmare? Is that what Lazaris is referring to? Because a new kind of human being can mean anything. But what is being actively engineered as we speak are smaller and smaller and more data-intense appendages to the human body. Fitbit and all these things that have emerged since Lazaris has been talking about that. So smartwatches, etc., and all that. And I'm personally sensitive to it, meaning my knuckles swell when I'm holding a phone that isn't in airplane mode. And that swelling lasts for more than a day. So I keep my phone on airplane mode. But, a lot of these appendages, Neuralink or others, require those Bluetooth things. Bluetooth has that effect on my hands. Wi-Fi has that effect on my hands. So I try and use wired. Now, interestingly, the old cordless phones do not have that effect on my hands. So at certain frequencies that are up more in the cellular and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi ranges, but cordless phones to a landline, I can hold them for 5 hours and not have as much swelling as I see in 10 minutes holding a cell phone that isn't in airplane mode, right? So I use hands-free and do, various things like that, and keep away from Wi-Fi routers and stuff like that. But the idea that that's the new kind of human being, someone connected with multiple implants with Wi-Fi and radioactive batteries and all that, seems as likely to be a nightmare as to be a dream. But it's not what I was thinking when I thought, heard Lazaris talk about this wonderful, whole new kind of human being. Now, the other, aspect of this is, Lazaris talks about negative ego and alien, and he said you have to unplug it. He said you can't win against a computer. You can unplug a computer. If you try and beat a chess-playing computer, it will always win. If you try and do this and do this, so Lazaris' solution was to unplug it, to push it out, to get rid of it. Well, that makes sense in the sense of just unplug your phone, delete your Facebook account, whatever. There is statistical correlation with depression and envy, etc., to how many hours you spend a day watching Facebook and all that. So you get rid of that. You get rid of the AI. But then where's the new human being that's left if you're not going into this kind of digital cyborg type mode? So I'm curious how that kind of ties together. Lazaris has talked about, that they were wrong about the Gulf War, and I don't think they denied that they've been wrong about medical diagnoses when they've been wrong. But I don't know that Lazaris has talked about, was this what they meant when they said a new kind of human being, or were they wrong about that? And how does the nightmare of broken confidence and the collapse of the American dream and the unwillingness and refusal to think and the unwillingness and refusal to feel and the explosion of negative ego, how does that coincide with the dream that gets to be so big that you just fall into it even unconsciously because you can't resist denying? Are we talking a difference in time? Like we're going to descend into the nightmare for the next 100 years and then, 200 or 300 years from now, that's going to pivot into the dream? Are we talking sequence, or are we talking parallel reality here? I don't know. But these are some of the things that, and Lazaris has also talked about, the Merlin Arthur legacy being eventually, so that's in the future, it's not right now. Right now there's lots of different ways to grow, but eventually to go all the way back home, to follow the thread all the way back to God, Goddess, all that is, one must follow the Merlin Arthur legacy. That's the only way, all the way back home, according to Lazaris. That one I'm, much more inclined to spoof, because it seems to suggest that, billions upon billions of people who are certainly not taking Merlin Arthur seriously are going to never get home because that's the only way. And they didn't take the workshop, and for them it's just a fairy story. But there's also the Merlin Arthur legacy is a little bit chauvinistic, It's not the goddess legacy or whatever. It's Merlin and Arthur in a might makes right paradigm of swords and, so we're dealing reptilian brain, trickery and this and that and deception, all that. It's like how, that just, for me, is just funny. I can hold questions and stuff about a lot of this, because, unlike the Gulf War, we don't know what Lazaris meant. We don't know what their time frame is exactly, and we don't know how they think they're doing on all that. And so, there's just a lot of vagueness. I have no idea, how all that's going to play out or is playing out, or what Lazaris said. But with, the physics of reality says that eventually everything that is in the illusion of separation must dispel the illusion and return to the one, to the awareness of the interconnected whole. That is a certainty that is part of a cycle. Now, some cycles might have 50,000-year cycles, some cycles might be 1,000,000 years, some cycles might be 1,000,000,000 years. But it is a physical certainty. It is an energetic certainty that is a cycle. Separation and return, forgetting and remembering. That is a cycle. And so at some point, all of the energy contained within human consciousness will transcend the blinders, the limitation of human consciousness, and will become aware of its innate connection, of its divine connection with all that is. That is a certainty. Now, the idea that every single human being is going to get there through the Merlin Arthur legacy just seems funny to me. I mean, why limit it, right? Why pin it down to one little thing? What about 1,000,000 years from now, when a better myth is created, a more evolved myth than the Merlin Arthur legacy, that's more updated than horses and knights and this and that, that's, relating to what's going on at the time? Is it inconceivable that human beings could and would create such a thing? Of course not. Human beings have iterated, and I was just watching some videos on YouTube about the 1800s. And one gentleman was raised by his grandparents, who were alive at the time of Napoleon. And he was talking about how astounding it was to him how many of the things people were certain would be around for 1,000 years were not around in his lifetime. Meaning, he had a direct connection through his grandparents with Napoleon. And he said 90% or more. And he said this is the biggest shocker for this gap. He said, all of those things that we thought would be around forever, they're all gone. They've all changed. I don't recognize the world that is in front of my eyes. It's not my grandparents' world, not even close. Now, we're watching a 1950s video before he dies, right? But this world has changed so much more. So the idea that in the next 1 trillion years of human evolution, on the journey home, that we won't embrace something more grand than the Merlin Arthur legacy, a medieval myth like many myths that contains truths and alchemies. Like all of the myths, there have been 10,000 stories in human history. Are all the humans that are now extinct physically not going to make it home because their last lifetime was before the Merlin Arthur? Or what about the Lemurians that just went home, that were done? Merlin Arthur wasn't invented around there. So there's plenty of ways home. There's plenty of ways back to one. So why the exclusivity, right? So my main kind of takeaway from all this is that it's up to each person to figure this stuff out, to make sense of it, to agree, to disagree for various reasons, knowing that it's all wrong. Knowing that if we keep growing and changing, everything that seems a no-brainer today will look different in the future. That 99% of what seems like the right thing to do today will look crazy in 1 billion years, will be outdated in 500 years. Including many of the things that Lazaris has said. Although maybe they get reframed. It's hard to say, right? It's hard to say, but this is an invitation to think.